Guys, so I have a very special video for you today. So as you may be able to tell from the title of this video and the general setup, I'm going to be doing a live brush swatch video of the new Ciaté I Am a Woman, What's Your Superpower 24-piece eyeshadow palette. So I know some people kind of made fun of this palette when they were talking about it in their What's Up in Makeup, new release type videos, whatever you want to call them. But when I saw this palette, I really couldn't resist just because of the names. So I'm a little, I guess, sentimental when it comes to makeup. I'm very into themes and names and all that good stuff. So there was one shade name in here in particular that I saw and I just decided to buy it. So in particular, I saw the Ruth Bader Ginsburg shade in here and I just had to buy it, so that was that. So if you didn't know, March is Women's History Month and March 8th is International Women's Day. And today, as I am filming this, March 24th, it is actually Equal Pay Day in the US. So if you're not aware, Equal Pay Day signifies the day every year by which women would have had to earn everything they've earned up to this point in 2021 to earn as much as their male counterparts did in 2020 on average. So March 24th is all women, all US women compared to all US men. And I also wanted to note that the numbers are even more egregious for women of color. So Black women on average, it will take them until August 3rd, 2021 to make the same amount of money that men did in 2020. And I think for Native American women, it's September 8th, 2021. And then for Latina women, it is October 21st, 2021. So almost a full year to make the same as men did in 2020. So I wanted to highlight that, and I just thought it'd be great to do a special video for Women's History Month and all those other things I mentioned. And I will be swatching these shades, but instead of going into depth about the color and everything like that, the different shades, I thought I would tell you a little bit about each of these women. And I had started to kind of gather information from different websites on all of the women in this palette. However, Ciaté very helpfully provided a little pamphlet about each of the women. So I'll be reading this. So that is what I will be reading from. And I also wanted to say on my nails, I am wearing the shade Madam President from OPI. This was part of their DC collection that came out in 2016. So I remember wearing this on the night of the election in 2016. So unfortunately that election didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, but at least we have a silver lining in that we have our first female vice president. And I purchased this from the Biden inauguration website. So as you can see, it is a little silhouette of Kamala Harris, and it says the first but not the last. So hopefully if Ciaté ever does a palette like this in the future, they will be able to include the first female president of the United States. So not all of these are American women. They're from all over the world, but I did want to kind of focus on that in particular. The last thing I did want to mention is that I fixed myself a nice little cocktail, gin and tonic, to sip while I'm filming this. And I actually used a Hendrix gin and tonic, this Hendrix limited edition variety they came out with. And the reason I mention that is because Hendrix actually has a female master distiller, Miss Leslie Gracie, I think. So I just wanted to highlight that as, you know, woman doing awesome things out there. I just have, like I said, a gin and tonic. I put a lime in it because I don't have any cucumber, which they recommend to garnish with, but that is what I will be sipping on. Okay, so going into the actual palette itself. So here is an overview of all the shades before I dig into it. And just a little bit about this palette. So this retails for $45 on the US site, and you get free shipping on all orders over $40. And I don't think it describes each shade in depth in terms of what the color is or the finish or anything like that. It just says it features soft nudes, shimmering neutrals, buttery mattes, and intense metallics, which have all been formulated with a creamy formulation and pigment-rich finish. So it is cruelty-free and PETA certified. It's made in China. Net weight is 35 grams or 1.23 ounces. And on the back here, it says, "To all the amazing women, we see you, we hear you, and we celebrate you. A stunning range of 24 complementary eyeshadows, each named after amazing women throughout history who inspire us. Create an array of eyeshadow looks and feel ready to take on the day with this empowering palette." So I think that's it. So for the swatches, I will be using my Lorac eyeshadow primer because I have a lot of it and it's easy to apply onto an arm. And then I have my Rephr number 21 brush, which is I think this is synthetic, but I will be using this for the kind of metallic shimmery shades. And then I have the number 2 brush from Rephr, which is a MAC 239 dupe. So I think this is a MAC 242 dupe, if I'm correct. And I think some of these brushes may be on sale right now in the Rephr concept store. I know you're probably sick of hearing about Rephr, but I will provide a link. It's not affiliate or anything like that. I don't get any sort of kickback from it, but if you are curious, I will provide a link to that below. And then finally, I have my Vermona color switch to clean off my brushes in between. And I will be using a makeup wipe to remove swatches and I guess a paper towel to kind of dry off my arm in between. So I think I can probably fit each row, so 6 at a time as opposed to 4. Okay, so first going into Frida Kahlo. And the colors don't necessarily kind of reflect the individual. So I'm sure some people would say that Frida Kahlo would be turning over in her grave if she were given kind of a matte beige type color, but there we are. So that is Frida Kahlo. And I guess I will go ahead and do a finger swatch next to it. All right, so for Frida Kahlo, she lived from 1907 to 1954, and the quote they have from her is, "At the end of the day, we can endure much more than we think we can." So it says, Mexican artist Frida Kahlo is remembered for her iconic and expressive self-portraits. She is celebrated in Mexico for her attention to Mexican and indigenous culture, and by feminists for her depiction of the female experience and form. Kahlo suffered from polio throughout her life, experiencing multiple fractures and broken bones. She channeled lots of her physical pain into her painting. In her lifetime, she had 30 operations. I didn't know that. Life experience is a common theme in Kahlo's approximately 200 paintings, sketches, and drawings. She also pulls from her emotional pain caused from her turbulent relationship with her husband, fellow artist Diego Rivera. So I'm not positive that they have any of her art, but if you're not aware, there is the National Museum of Women in the Arts, I think it's called, in downtown DC. So I encourage you to check out that museum, travel and everything permitting when you get a chance. So there you go. So there is the first shade. So the next one is Sojourner Truth. This one's a little bit more of a peachier matte. Maybe a soft sheen on that one. So Sojourner Truth lived from 1797 to 1883, so she had a nice long life. And her quote says, "Truth is powerful and it prevails." Sojourner Truth, an abolitionist and Black women's rights activist, is one of the most inspirational women in America's history. Born into slavery, she managed to escape to freedom with her daughter. In the attempt to rescue her son, who had been sold illegally, she became the first woman to win a case against a white man to rescue her son. She is most well known for her speech, "Ain't I a Woman?" in which she spoke to both her race and gender. All right, so next up is Joan of Arc. These are applying really nicely with the brush. Okay, so Joan of Arc lived from 1412 to 1431, and her quote is, "Act and God will act." Joan of Arc was a young peasant girl living in medieval France. With absolutely no military training, Joan convinced Prince Charles of Valois to allow her to lead a French army, where it achieved a huge victory over the English and their French allies. Joan was captured by Anglo-Burgundian forces and charged for witchcraft and heresy. She was burned at the stake in 1431 at the age of 19. She's also known as the Maid of Orleans and has been long considered one of history's greatest saints and an enduring symbol of French unity and nationalism. So that is Joan of Arc. I would have probably picked a silver or gray shade for her because I always think of her wearing that armor, I think. So, all right, the next one is Emmeline Pankhurst. All right, so Emmeline Pankhurst lived from 1858 to 1928, and the quote says, "Justice and judgment lie often a world apart." Political activist Emmeline Pankhurst changed the course of women's lives forever by helping them win the right to vote in the 1910s and 20s. Recognized by Time as one of the 100 most important people of the 20th century, she has now been commemorated with a statue in London close to the Houses of Parliament. All right, it looks like we have our first kind of metallic or shimmery shade. This is Cleopatra. So a dry brush will often give you the least amount of payoff with a metallic or shimmery shade. So sometimes I like to use a brush on the eyes just to kind of get the outline of where I want it to go and then follow in with my finger because you get more opaque and richer coverage that way. Okay, so Cleopatra, who lived from 69 BC to 30 BC, it says, "The Queen of Egypt, Cleopatra, ruled successfully and was the last active pharaoh of Egypt. Cleopatra actively influenced Roman politics at a crucial time, and she came to represent the prototype of the romantic femme fatale. She was considered a symbol of beauty, famous for her beauty treatments, such as bathing in milk and honey, and her iconic black kohl eyeliner. Although used since prehistoric times, kohl was important in Egypt, and Cleopatra remains the poster girl for its use." All right, and then the last shade in this row is called Ruth Bader Ginsburg, one of my personal idols. So, just enough space. So, sadly, it looks like they printed this after she passed. Ruth Bader Ginsburg lived from 1933 to 2020, and her quote is, "My mother told me to be a lady, and for her that meant be your own person, be independent." Born in Brooklyn in 1933, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, or the notorious RBG, as she is affectionately known, studied law at Harvard and subsequently Columbia University, where in a year that was majority men, she graduated joint top of her class. From 1993, she was an associate justice at the Supreme Court of the United States. An advocate for gender equality, she fought to win many cases on behalf of women's rights in the Supreme Court. Okay, so there's one last look at the first row. Okay, so for the second row, the first shade is called Rosa Parks. Another metallic shade. Okay, so Rosa Parks lived from 1913 to 2005, and her quote says, "I would like to be remembered as a person who wanted to be free, so other people would be also free." In Alabama, 1955, Rosa Parks was sitting at the front of a bus when the driver asked her to stand up and give her seat to a white man. When Parks, a black woman, refused, she was arrested. Her brave actions sparked a wave of protests and an entire civil rights movement across America. When she died at the age of 92 in 2005, she became the first woman to lie in state at the U.S. Capitol. So that's a nice bit of trivia for you. Okay, so up next, we have Eleanor Roosevelt. So I don't know what you all think of Barbie as a brand. I think they've done a lot to kind of rehabilitate their image in the last, 10 years maybe, being more, I guess, body positive and inclusive. So they have a line of Barbie dolls that are, I think they're called the Inspiring Women series. And the most recent one they released, I think earlier this month, was Eleanor Roosevelt. So if you have a young girl in your life and you want to buy her a toy and want to inspire her at the same time, I think there are definitely worse things that you could buy for a child. I actually purchased the Susan B. Anthony one for myself. They also have Maya Angelou is a recent one. So anyway, lots of great role models for young girls. But for Eleanor Roosevelt, she lived from 1884 to 1962. And as anyone who ever watched the Princess Diaries can tell you, one of her famous quotes is, "No one can make you feel inferior without your consent." So Eleanor Roosevelt was known as one of the most respected and loved women of the 20th century. When Eleanor Roosevelt's husband became president, she transformed the role of the First Lady by taking an active role in the work of her husband, Franklin D. Roosevelt. After Franklin's passing, Eleanor Roosevelt was appointed as a delegate to the newly formed United Nations, where she helped create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So that is Eleanor Roosevelt. Next up, we have Harriet Tubman. So Harriet Tubman lived from 1822 to 1913, and her quote says, "I would fight for my liberty so long as my strength lasted, and if the time came for me to go, the Lord would let them take me." Harriet Tubman was an American slave who escaped from slavery in the South to become a leading abolitionist before the American Civil War. She led hundreds of slaves to freedom in North America along the route of the Underground Railroad, where an elaborate secret network of safe houses were built to protect the men and women. So that is Harriet Tubman. Hopefully we will see her on the $20 bill before too long. All right, going into the next one, this is, I'm not positive how to pronounce her name. I want to say Junko Tabei. I actually had to look her up because I unfortunately was not familiar with her. So we will share why she is so remarkable in a minute. But this is a very glittery shade. I think this is one where I would definitely recommend using a damp brush or a finger to apply. Okay, so Junko Tabei, she lived from 1939 to 2016, and her quote was, "Everest for me, and I believe for the world, is the physical and symbolic manifestation of overcoming odds to achieve a dream." So as you may have guessed, Junko Tabei was a Japanese mountaineer, an author, and a teacher. She was the first woman to reach the summit of Mount Everest. Tabei continued her success by writing books and organizing environmental projects to clean up rubbish left behind by climbers on Everest. An astronomer later named asteroid 6897 Tabei after her, and in 2019, a mountain range on Pluto was named Tabei Montes in her honor. So that is Junko Tabei. All right, next up we have Ella Fitzgerald. Try to fit both of these on. I think that would be pretty for a wash all over the lids. Okay, so Ella Fitzgerald lived from 1917 to 1996. And the quote is, "It isn't where you came from, it's where you're going that counts." Famously dubbed as the First Lady of Song, Ella Fitzgerald was the most popular female jazz singer in America for over half a century. In her lifetime, she won 13 Grammy Awards and sold over 40 million albums. Throughout her career, she worked with all the jazz greats, from Duke Ellington, Count Basie and Nat King Cole, to Frank Sinatra, Dizzy Gillespie, and Benny Goodman, and performed at top venues all over the world. So that is Ella Fitzgerald. The next one is Bessie Coleman. And again, just squeezing this one in. So Bessie Coleman lived from 1892 to 1926, and the quote is, "You've never lived till you've flown." In 1921, Coleman became the first African American and Native American woman to earn an international pilot's license, despite racial discrimination preventing her entry to American flying schools. As there was no flight training available to women in the U.S., she studied in France. Upon returning to the States, she became known for flying stunts and air shows. Coleman died in a plane crash in 1926, but was an inspiration to early and minority pilots. So there is the second row. All right, so first up in the third row, we have Madam C.J. Walker. So Madam C.J. Walker, she lived from 1867 to 1919. The quote says, "I am not satisfied in making money for myself. I endeavor to provide employment to hundreds of women of my race." Sarah Breedlove was born in Louisiana to sharecroppers just 2 years after the Civil War. She launched an enormously successful hair care company that targeted underserved African American women. She changed her name to Madam C.J. Walker after her husband, but also for the French connotations and grandeur. The Guinness Book of Records records her as the first female self-made millionaire in America. Next up, we have Marsha P. Johnson. Again, this one's a little bit stiffer. I think using a finger or a wet brush will be the way to go. Okay, so Marsha P. Johnson lived from 1945 to 1992. Her quote says, "I may be crazy, but that don't make me wrong." Marsha P. Johnson was an African-American transgender woman who was an LGBTQ rights activist. Johnson was one of the leading members in the Stonewall Uprising in 1969, and along with Sylvia Rivera, co-founded the Street Transvestite, now Transgender, Action Revolutionaries, STAR, a group committed to helping homeless transgender youth in New York. Tragically, she was found dead on July 6, 1992, at the age of 46. Her life and achievements are not forgotten, as she has continued to be celebrated in numerous books, documentaries, and films. All right, next up we have Grace Hopper. So Grace Hopper lived from 1906 to 1992. Her quote says, "A ship in port is safe, but that's not what ships are built for." Grace Hopper was an American computer scientist who is best known for her pioneering work as an early computer programmer, beginning her computing career in 1944 when she worked on the Harvard Mark I computer. She was the first to devise the theory of machine interdependent programming languages. During her lifetime, Hopper was awarded 40 honorary degrees from universities across the world, and in 1991, she received the National Medal of Technology. Okay, so the next one is Maya Angelou. So Maya Angelou lived from 1928 to 2014. Her quote says, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel." Maya Angelou was a poet, writer, and civil rights activist who wrote the seminal award-winning memoir, I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. The book explored themes of identity and racism, and became the first nonfiction bestseller by an African-American woman. Her work was a hugely influential force in the civil rights movement. All right, so next up we have Mae Jemison. This one does not have a ton of pigment, but it's a pretty shade. Okay, so Mae Jemison, she's still living, so she was born in 1956, and her quote says, "I like to think of ideas as potential energy. They're really wonderful, but nothing will happen until we risk putting them into action." So Mae C. Jemison was an American astronaut and physician who on June 4th, 1987, became the first African-American woman to be enrolled into NASA's astronaut training program. On September 12, 1992, Jemison finally flew into space with 6 other astronauts aboard to complete the mission STS-47, becoming the first African-American woman in space. In recognition of her accomplishments, Jemison has received several awards and honorary doctorates. Okay, so the last one here is Marie Curie. And this one I'm having to kind of pat on. It's not quite as smooth, it seems. So I just checked the ingredients to see if there was carmine in this palette, which would mean it wasn't vegan. I don't see any jumping out at me. It does say that this is, I guess, purely an eyeshadow palette. This is going over my kind of wrist wrinkles, so it's not maybe as smooth as it could be. But that is Marie Curie. So she lived from 1867 to 1934. The quote says, "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we may fear less." French-Polish Marie Curie was a pioneering physicist and chemist who was the first person and only woman to win 2 Nobel Prizes. During her career, she coined the term radioactivity and discovered the elements radium and polonium. Curie faced discrimination throughout her career as science and physics was such a male-dominated field. But despite this, her research remains relevant and still influences the world of science today. So that is another look at the third row. All right, so the last row, we have Claudette Colvin. I think that's how you say her name. It's a really pretty champagne-y type shade. So Claudette Colvin was born in 1939, and the quote says, "I knew then, and I know now, that when it comes to justice, there is no easy way to get it. You can't sugarcoat it. You have to take a stand and say, this is not right." Claudette Colvin is a retired American nurse who was an activist in the 1950s civil rights movement. On March 2nd, 1955, she was arrested at the age of 15 in Montgomery, Alabama, for refusing to give up her seat to a white woman on a crowded, segregated bus. This occurred 9 months before the more widely known incident involving Rosa Parks. She went on to testify in court, and then 1 month later, the Supreme Court affirmed the order to Montgomery and the state of Alabama to end bus segregation. All right, so this next shade is called Boudicca. So Boudicca lived around 30 to 61 AD, I guess. So it says, a British folk hero, Boudicca was queen of the Iceni tribe 60 or 61 AD. She led a revolt against the Roman occupation of Britain. Leading an army of around 100,000, she succeeded in driving the Romans out of modern-day Colchester, then capital of Roman Britain, London, and St. Albans. Her success led Roman Emperor Nero to consider withdrawing from Britain entirely. All right, so next up we have Amelia Earhart. So Amelia Earhart lived from 1897 to 1937, and her quote was, "Women must try to do things as men have tried. When they fail, their failure must be but a challenge to others." So from a young age, Amelia Earhart refused to be boxed in by gender norms. She went on to become one of the most famous women in American history as the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic and the first person ever to fly solo from Hawaii to the U.S. In July 1937, Earhart disappeared during her attempt to be the first person to circumnavigate the globe. To this day, it remains a great unsolved mystery. All right, so next up we have Hattie McDaniel. I think due to the color and depth of the shade, you kind of have to pat this one a little bit. Feels a little bit drier. You can see kind of, bunching up on my skin there. Okay, so Hattie McDaniel lived from 1893 to 1952. Her quote is, "A woman's gifts will make room for her. In the mid-1920s, Hattie McDaniel became one of the first African-American women to perform on radio. In 1934, she landed her first on-screen break in the film Judge Priest. Her revolutionary acting career didn't stop there. She later became the first African-American to win an Oscar in 1940 for her role as Mammy in Gone with the Wind. All right, so next up we have Amelia Robinson. Got a little crooked there. I think having the kind of shimmer in this makes the similar color to Hattie McDaniel kind of apply a little bit better. I mean, it's a little less purple, I guess, but... Okay, so Amelia Robinson lived from 1911 to 2015. Her quote says, "Remember, this is your day and your world." Amelia Boynton Robinson was a civil rights activist who was one of the leaders of the American Civil Rights Movement in Selma, Alabama. In 1964, she became both the first African-American woman and the first female Democratic candidate to run for a seat in Congress from Alabama. In 1990, Boynton won the Martin Luther King Jr. Presidential Medal of Freedom. And then last, and perhaps least, we have the shade U, which is a little cheesy, but I appreciate the idea. Another very kind of sparkly shade. Feels really creamy though when you apply it like that. Okay, so what does it say about me? It says, "The modern woman, you. We are powerful and we are capable. From caring and courageous mothers to politicians and CEOs, our abilities are endless. And from the past to the present, we continue to prove that girls really do run the world." So I guess I'll add a little bit to that just about myself. So I am an attorney. I work for a government agency here in the DC area. And I guess I'm proud of where I am and what I've achieved. I certainly had opportunities in life that maybe other people's didn't. You know, my family isn't like extremely well off, but we come from a fairly comfortable middle-class background. My dad was in the Army. My mom was a stay-at-home mom. But before she decided to stay at home with us, she did graduate from college. I think she was the first in her family to do so. She got her nursing degree, and I remember that she did work as a nurse while we were little, before she was able to stay at home. And due to the nature of my dad's job, moving a lot, it made sense, I guess, that she would stay home because, you know, it's hard to build a career that way. So that was a choice she made, and I respect that. And I definitely recognize that that was a luxury that she was able to do so, because many families, they don't have a choice. Both partners, if there are two partners, have to work. And she always placed a lot of importance on education. I remember when we were little, our reward for getting an A on a report card was that we could select a book from the Scholastic catalog. So rewarding academics with more reading. And I did love to read as a kid. I probably would read a lot more now if it weren't for YouTube and the internet. But yeah, I was always into school, and luckily I was able to do well enough to go to a good college. I studied American history and English, and then of course go on to law school where I got my law degree and so forth. So anyway, that is just a little bit about me and my mom. That was almost more of a like Mother's Day tribute, but I think, you know, it's important to recognize the women in our life year round, especially our mothers and everything. So that is what the palette looks like after all the swatches. So not too bad. One of my fingers, by the way, does seem to be a little stained. I don't know which shade did that, but anyway, my swatching finger is a little stained. So I think that's really all I have to say. I think some of these shades definitely performed better than others. I think I prefer some over others. You can say what you want about the concept of this palette, whether it's a cash grab, whether the shades actually reflect the person that they're named after. It may be a cash grab, but you know, sometimes I'm a sucker and I buy things for sentimental reasons. So that's gonna be it, guys. But I will give another cheers to all the beautiful, amazing, creative, intelligent, capable, brave women out there. Felt like I was starting to repeat adjectives. If you enjoyed this video, enjoyed learning a little bit about some amazing women throughout history, please do give this a thumbs up and share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment down below. I'll try to include some other links, other resources to learn more about these women if you wanted to kind of mine that, if you have any children doing at-home schooling at the moment or just wanted to kind of enrich them in their knowledge of women's history. So I'll try to wrap this up finally, but I hope you guys are all staying very safe and healthy out there, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.